The disk in her fingers was always cold. Dark matter absorbs heat, and 60,000 years of handling had not warmed it once. High Sovereign Thessara Vaughn turned the compact seal in her 7-fingered grip, a habit, an old one, the kind that stopped meaning anything centuries before the motion did, and looked out at the dark between dead stars. The shadow arrived before the sound did. That was the wrong detail. Ships announced themselves. Ships requested clearance. Ships waited at the null margin perimeter until the Sovereign Deus Traffic Authority confirmed their berth assignment and transmitted docking coordinates and logged their arrival in the official record. The human vessel did none of these things. It materialized from faster-than-light translation at a distance that should have been physically impossible, directly above the station. And the bay doors opened automatically because the docking AI processed the request as standard diplomatic protocol, and no one thought to override it until 5 humans were already walking the corridor. Compact chronicler Felon Dross noted this in his record. He noted it in the careful archival language he had spent 43 years perfecting. Arrival occurred outside registered parameters. Docking clearance was not formally requested. Bay Authority logged the entry understanding diplomatic reception protocols. He wrote it precisely. He did not write what he was thinking, which was that the compact's most secure station had just been walked into by 5 people who hadn't asked permission, and that the most significant detail was not that they had done it, it was that no one had stopped them. Felon clicked his stylus against his recording tablet, twice, then a third time. He watched Sable Orenveth walk into the chamber of the Eternal Compact and take the center of it without waiting to be addressed. What happens next, he would write in the private margin of his chronicle, the section he never archived. I wish I could say ended there. It did not. Stay close. 743 years. That is how long it had been since the Compact last convened an emergency session. Not a standard plenary, not a priority review, but a full emergency convening with all seated members required to attend within one standard cycle. Felon knew this because he had checked. He checked everything compulsively, as all Orethians did. His species had evolved wide, flat craniums specifically for the storage of detail, and Felon had filled his with 6 decades of compact administrative history until there was very little room left for anything else. 743 years, and the last emergency session had concerned a supernova in a populated corridor, not a species. The agenda for this session listed 2 words, just 2, the humans. In 60,000 years of compact records, no species had ever warranted an agenda entry that short. Integration proceedings ran to 47 standard line items. Resource allocation reviews required a minimum of 12 subclauses. Even the admittance of gaseous life forms, which required 3 additional atmospheric management annexes, generated more documentation than this. 2 words. Felon clicked his stylus. He was seated in the chronicler's alcove, slightly elevated above the main chamber floor, angled to observe every face at the council table without being in any face's direct line of sight. This was traditional. The chronicle was supposed to be invisible, the way history was invisible while it was happening. He had always found this arrangement comfortable. Today, for the first time in his career, he wished he were sitting somewhere else. The Sovereign Deus chamber was a ring of dark stone and darker space. No decorative lighting. No material that caught or reflected, only the council members themselves providing illumination, the bioluminescent markers of their various biologies casting soft competing colors across the table's surface. Thessara Vaughn, High Sovereign and Presiding Authority, sat at the ring's apex. Her fingertips were at minimum brightness. Felon had attended 2,341 sessions as compact chronicler. He had never seen her fingertips that dim. She was turning the compact seal in her hand. The seal was a palm-sized disk of compressed dark matter, the only material in the known galaxy that absorbed heat without re-emitting it. Every high sovereign since the compact's founding had carried it. 60,000 years of handling, of nervous turning and formal presentation and investiture ceremony had left the disk unchanged. It was the same temperature as the space between stars. Thessara's fingers moved around its edge. Over the engraved names of every species the compact had ever integrated, 94 entries pressed into its surface in the formal script of their integration year, and her expression held the specific quality of a person calculating paperwork. She expected to engrave one more name. The integration demand, she said to the chamber without preamble, without calling the session formally to order, will be transmitted at the start of the next standard cycle. 10 days for their response. This is generous. She did not look at anyone when she said this. The High Sovereign of the Eternal Compact had not needed to make eye contact in order to be obeyed for quite some time. Phelan recorded the session in the manner he had recorded all sessions, linearly, formally, with the neutral precision that his training demanded. He did not record his observations. He recorded facts. Fact: the Eternal Compact had administered galactic civilization for 60,000 years. Fact: its authority rested on a system called, in official documentation, the Partnership Framework for Galactic Development. The word tribute did not appear in any official compact document. Phelan knew both the official language and its translation. He recorded the official language. Fact: every species that reached a defined threshold of technological development received the framework's integration demand: 30% of resources, 30% of new technology, 30% of military capacity, in exchange for protection, guidance, and recognized membership in galactic civilization. Fact: of the 94 species integrated since the Compact's founding, not one had refused. Several had negotiated. Several had required what the official record called corrective measures, blockades, occupation of outlying settlements, brief demonstrations of enforcement, armada capability. But in the end, all 94 had accepted. The pattern was so consistent that Phelan had never thought of it as a pattern. He thought of it the way he thought of atmospheric pressure or orbital mechanics, as a condition of reality, not a thing that might vary. He was still thinking about it that way when Elder Counselor Maeve Thesson raised the question of administrative processing. Maeve Thesson was Thurvani, one of the founding species, crystal-embodied, faces absent in any sense Phelan's biology could parse, communication delivered through structured light displays that shifted across the spectrum in patterns Phelan had spent 12 years learning to read. He was the oldest sitting council member, which in Thurvani terms meant he had been old for longer than most civilizations had existed. He tapped his crystal fingers together in the quick short pattern that indicated mild impatience. The human tribute allocation, he said, his light display shifting to the administrative amber he used for procedural matters, should be processed through the Sector 7 Compliance Office. There is no reason to create a separate administrative track. Sector 7 has the experience. Sector 7 has a 6-month backlog, someone noted. I don't see why the humans should jump the queue. Several council members indicated agreement through their various species-appropriate gestures. Phelan wrote this down. He wrote it with the steady, precise click of his stylus that he had maintained through 2,341 sessions, the rhythm of institutional continuity, the sound of a civilization that expected tomorrow to resemble today. He would think about that sound later in the months that followed with the particular clarity that only arrives after the thing you failed to notice has already finished happening. General Dreth Vaughn was not a council member, but he attended as the Compact's senior military authority, seated in the observer's tier with his 6 copper-plated arms folded across his armored chest in the Drathian resting posture that, in their culture, communicated complete readiness. He was ceremonially scarred across his jaw and upper thorax, old marks from engagements so early in his career that the species he had fought no longer existed in their pre-integration form. He had overseen integration military operations 17 times. He had already opened the tactical display of human space on his personal screen before the session ended. Phelan noticed this. He did not record it. It was not technically a fact of the session. He noticed that Vaughn studied the display with the expression of a craftsman reviewing a familiar material, not interest, not alertness, just the background engagement of someone confirming what they already knew. He noticed that Vaughn made several small notations with his secondary arm, the one he used for administrative work. He noticed that Vaughn never once looked at the intelligence file entry on Secretary Compact Sable Orenveth of the Unified Terran Assembly. The file was open on the shared briefing surface. The photograph looked back at the council table with an expression that Phelan, who prided himself on reading behavioral indicators across 16 species, could not categorize. Not calm, not defiance, something prior to both. He set his stylus down. It was the first time in 43 years of chronicling that he had voluntarily stopped recording mid-session. The integration demand transmitted on schedule. In the formal diplomatic language of the Compact, it began, in recognition of your species' demonstrated technological achievement and in furtherance of galactic stability and mutual prosperity, the Eternal Compact extends to the Unified Terran Assembly the opportunity for full partnership membership. It ran to 47 clauses. It was, as demanded by protocol, simultaneously transmitted to Earth's primary governmental authority and broadcast on all available channels to every human colony, station, and vessel in known space. This last part was not, strictly speaking, required by protocol. It was a choice. It was intended to ensure that humanity understood from the first moment the scope of the authority they were dealing with. 10 days. Days 1 through 3 produced no response. This was not unusual. Integration demands were complex documents. Species typically required time to review, to convene their own internal debates, to work through the stages of reaction that the compact had observed 94 times. Alarm, then calculation, then the pragmatic recognition that acceptance was the only viable path. Days 4 through 6 produced no response. Phelan searched the archive for species that had taken more than 5 days to respond. He found 11. All 11 had subsequently required corrective measures. None had ultimately refused. Days 7 and 8 produced no response. He searched for species that had taken more than 7 days. He found 3. He read their integration files carefully. He was not sure what he was looking for. Day 9 arrived. The response arrived with it. 11 seconds of transmission. One woman, a plain desk, a gray suit without insignia or decoration. No advisors visible. No flags, no governmental symbols, nothing in the frame that was not the desk and the woman sitting behind it. Her dark hair was pulled back. Her hands were folded on the desk's surface. Her face held the expression that Phelan still could not name from the intelligence photograph. And now it was moving, and she was looking directly at the recording device, and she said, "No." The transmission ended. Total length 11 seconds. Phelan clicked his stylus so hard the tip left a groove in the recording tablet's surface. He would carry that tablet for the rest of his career without having the groove repaired. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then the silence broke into questions. Was there more to the transmission? Was this a preliminary message? Was there a technical error in the feed? And Phelan recorded none of them, because he was doing a calculation he had never done before in 43 years. He was checking whether the transmission had been sent exclusively to the compact, or whether it had been broadcast. It had been broadcast. Simultaneously on every channel the one-word transmission had used to receive the integration demand. Secretary Compact Sable Orenveth of the Unified Terran Assembly had returned a single syllable to every species in the galaxy. Among the tributary species, Phelan began noticing something in the unofficial communication channels his archival access granted him visibility into. A word repeated in dozens of translations. A human word, apparently, though he had to look it up. He had studied 26 languages and he did not know this one. He found it in the Xenolinguistics database under Terran Emotional Concepts, Mid-Complexity. Hope. He did not record what he found in the unofficial channels. He did not record the word. He recorded human response received, content, single negation, broadcast scope, galaxy-wide, council deliberating response options. He clicked his stylus. General Dreth Vaughn dispatched 300 ships of the Eternal Enforcement Armada to Calder's Reach. 300 ships was, by any calculation, more than sufficient. The Enforcement Armada's total operational strength was 4,000 vessels across 12 sectors, ancient by modern standards, many of them last modernized 8 centuries prior, but maintained with the obsessive care of an institution that considered its ships' continued existence to be itself a form of power. 300 of them represented a statement. Vaughn could have accomplished the objective with 30. The objective was simple: occupy Calder's Reach, humanity's most productive outer colony, hold it until the Terran Assembly reconsidered its position, then release it in exchange for formal integration acceptance. It was the 5th option listed in the Compact's Standard Corrective Measures Protocol. It had been used 9 times. It had worked 9 times. Calder's Reach had a human population of approximately 9 million. It had 3 warships in orbit and a modest array of defensive platforms on its surface. The defensive platforms would need to be neutralized, humanely, the protocol specified, with minimal structural damage. The warships would need to be warned off. Vaughn reviewed his tactical projections on the journey. He had ordered a meal brought to the bridge. He ate it at his primary station while his secondary and tertiary arms made notations in the operational log, a habit of efficiency that had served him through 17 integration operations. He was, by his own calculation, approximately 60% of the way through writing his post-operation report before the fleet dropped out of faster-than-light transit at the edge of the Calder's Reach system. Ahead of them, a blue-green planet, 1 moon, standard defensive posture. Colonel Sarah Dunmore of Calder's Reach contacted the fleet 8 minutes after they arrived. "You are entering sovereign human territory," she said. "You have 6 hours to withdraw. This is your only warning." Vaughn did not respond immediately. He finished a notation in the operational log. Then he looked at the image of the human colonel, a weathered face, a military bearing, the kind of stillness that Vaughn, in his 42 years of service, associated with experienced soldiers. "You have 3 ships," he said, his translator rendering his Drathian into her language. "We have 300. I would recommend reviewing your options." 6 hours, Dunmore said, starting now. She cut the feed. Vaughn made a sound that his crew recognized as amusement. he finished his meal. The surface platforms were neutralized in the opening exchange, 4 minutes of weapons fire. The 3 human warships broke orbit and retreated toward the planet's southern pole, firing defensive bursts that accomplished nothing against compact shielding. Standard evasion, standard delaying action. Vaughn logged it as textbook behavior and began the occupation approach. He was noting the satellite coverage gaps for landing site selection when his sensor officer said, "Sir." "The moon." Vaughn looked up. Calder's Reach had 1 moon. It was a standard rocky body, 2,100 kilometers in diameter, geologically inactive, tidally locked, no atmosphere. It had appeared on every scan of the system as exactly that, a standard rocky body. The compact's pre-operation survey had cataloged it. The geological composition had come back as basalt primary with iron-nickel inclusions. Standard moon, no anomalies. The geological shell was splitting. Not breaking apart, not fragmenting from internal pressure. Splitting deliberately in sections like the panels of something that had been designed to open, beneath the rock that was not rock, metal, mechanisms. A weapons platform the size of a small continent, disguised under a geological shell that had fooled 4 years of compact scanning because it had been built to fool 4 years of compact scanning. Vaughn had 1 second to understand what he was looking at. The rail impactors fired. Each projectile was a tungsten rod, roughly 2 meters long, launched at a measurable fraction of light speed by magnetic acceleration systems that had been running at standby power for 4 years under the basalt casing. The compact shields had been designed against energy weapons, against kinetic projectiles at conventional velocities, against the tactical threat profile of species the compact had fought in the past 8 centuries. None of those species had built their doctrine around fighting a technologically superior opponent from the start. None of them had spent 200 years studying the specific geometry of compact shielding from the outside and calculating exactly what velocity would be required to exceed its tolerance threshold. The shields on Vaughn's flagship held for 3 seconds. Then the first impacts arrived. The 3 retreating human warships stopped retreating. They had not, Felon would later learn, actually been retreating. They had been positioning. The distinction was significant. The compact's tactical doctrine assumed that a smaller force falling back toward a planet was seeking cover, buying time, attempting to minimize engagement until relief arrived or terms could be negotiated. It assumed this because this is what a smaller force under those conditions would rationally do. The human ships blinked. That was the only word Felon could find for it when he read the battle record. They blinked out of normal space and back into it, but not where they had been. They were inside the formation, not at the edges of the formation, not at the rear of the formation. Inside it, at point-blank range to vessels they had, moments earlier, been retreating from. Faster-than-light micro-jumps, fractional light-second translations, performed inside a combat formation, with the precision that the compact's own navigators reported, with genuine confusion in their filed assessments, should have been physically impossible given the time required for calculation. Felon read those navigation assessments carefully. The human ships had been practicing the maneuver for 11 years. The human ships were already firing when they materialized. That detail, the sequence of it, firing before their translation fields had fully collapsed, rounds in flight before any compact sensor had registered their arrival, would occupy 12 separate tactical analysis reports over the following 18 months, and none of them would arrive at a satisfying explanation. The mathematics of faster-than-light microjumps inside an active combat formation required a calculation window that no known species could compress below 47 seconds. The human ships had performed theirs in less than 2. They had been practicing for 11 years. Felon set his stylus down for the second time in his career. From the concealed bays that had been standard equipment storage on all 3 vessels, drone swarms poured into the formation. Not missiles, not ordnance. Each drone was a decision-maker, an autonomous unit running a tactical assessment model that had been trained specifically against compact shielding geometry. Each one found the gap that no compact engineer had known existed, because the engineers who built the shields had never needed to study them from the outside with hostile intent. Every gap in the compact's shielding was a data point the Terran assembly had been cataloging since the day the integration demand arrived. The drones did not destroy ships, they disabled them. There was a distinction, and the humans were careful about it. In the Kalahari formation, 3 fragment ships operating as a single distributed mind, their consciousness spread across all 3 hulls simultaneously. Something happened that Felon, reading the battle record weeks later, found himself unable to categorize in any existing chronicle framework. One of the fragments stopped. Not the hull, not the systems. The mind fragment that had been piloting that section of the distributed consciousness simply ceased to hold coherence. The Kalahari called it something in their language that translated, approximately, as the moment a thought forgets it is a thought. The fragment went dark. It did not reform. Felon wrote this down. He wrote it carefully. It was the only paragraph in his entire chronicle that he wrote more than once. Then the voices started. On personal frequencies. On private command channels that the Compact Communications Analysis team would spend 4 months trying to understand how the humans had accessed. Voices addressed captains by name, not by rank, not by designation, by name, by the names their families used. Information arrived that had no business arriving. Medical records, a commander's estranged sibling's current location, the specific dietary restriction one Thurvani captain had requested at his last planetary layover. Nothing threatening, nothing violent. Operational effectiveness, simply an absolute knowledge of who they were dealing with. Commander Yeth Oravar Drathine, 42 years of service, had never retreated in his career. His service record included a commendation notation that specifically cited his refusal to withdraw from an engagement in his 4th year that had cost him 3 secondary arms. He killed his own ship's faster-than-light drive trying to execute an unauthorized jump. The drive had not been warm enough. The ship went nowhere. 2 other Drathine captains abandoned their posts. Thessara Vond received the first battle data in her pressurized observation chamber. Her aide delivered the preliminary summary on a standard report surface. She took it. She read the first 3 lines. She asked for a glass of water. Her aide brought it. She held it in her 7-fingered grip. The condensation formed around the point where her fingertips met the glass, the bioluminescent markers in her skin making the water surface glow faintly where they touched. She did not drink. Her aide waited. The glass stayed full for the entire length of the remaining transmission. The final count arrived 6 hours after the opening exchange. 300 vessels dispatched. 11 returned. 289 gone, destroyed, disabled, or surrendered, the categories distributed in a ratio that the tactical analysts would not want to discuss publicly. 40,000 dead, 60,000 in human custody. Of those 60,000, Felon noted, everyone had been offered medical care before interrogation, meals before processing, and translation assistance before any documentation was required. He noted this because he was a chronicler and it was a fact. He noted it in a separate section from the engagement totals because the juxtaposition he felt was important. He could not have explained precisely why he felt this. He wrote it down. What he learned next, he did not immediately understand. A junior archivist in the Compact's Communication Monitoring Division filed a report, routine, procedurally correct, sent through the standard escalation pathway that ensured it arrived on Felon's desk 3 days after it might have been useful, noting that the Battle of Calder's Reach had been broadcast live. Felon read this carefully. He read it again. Live, unedited, every exchange, every failed maneuver, every tactical error annotated in real time by a human commentator who had explained, in measured and courteous language, exactly what the Compact ships had done wrong and why. The commentator had not been triumphant. He had not been contemptuous. He had been methodical the way an educator was methodical, and his commentary had gone out on the same frequencies the original integration demand had used. Every species in the known galaxy had access to those frequencies. Felon pulled the reception data. Every species had watched. He sat with this for a very long time. He had spent 43 years recording the Compact's authority, its proceedings, its decisions, its corrective measures, its integration ceremonies. He had recorded it faithfully because it was there to be recorded, because it was real, because 60,000 years of sustained power was not a fiction. It was the defining fact of galactic civilization. He understood, sitting with the reception data, that he had been recording something slightly different. He had been recording the performance of authority. The authority itself, the thing that made species comply before corrective measures became necessary, the thing that made 94 integration proceedings end without sustained conflict, was not the Armada. It was not the enforcement protocols. It was the belief held by every species in the galaxy that the Compact was an unquestionable force. That resistance was irrational. That the mathematics of the situation simply did not leave room for refusal. 112 species had now watched 300 Compact ships enter a system defended by 3 warships and a moon, and come out of it with 11. The tribute Felon calculated would stop automatically, not because of a treaty, not because of a formal declaration. Because the belief was gone, the performance had failed its audience. An institution built on 60,000 years of uncontested authority had just contested something and lost, and every tributary species had watched the commentator explain exactly which tactical assumptions had made the loss inevitable. He began clicking his stylus. He clicked it for a long time. He could not stop. The new loop, the one that opened in the back of his mind and would not close, was not about humanity. It was about the galaxy without the Compact's myth. What held the distributed pieces of civilization together when the structure that had organized them was revealed to be partly a story everyone had agreed to believe? He did not know the answer. He was not sure anyone did. He filed this thought in the private margin of his chronicle, the section he had never archived, and then he sat staring at the archived section for longer than he would later be willing to admit. Thessara Vond read the 900-page intelligence report on humanity. All of it. Alone, in her pressurized chamber at a reading rate appropriate to its density over the course of 11 hours. The report had been compiled by the Compact's intelligence division across 4 years, beginning, Felon noted, not after the no, but after the first scan of human space had returned readings the analysts wanted a second opinion on. It covered everything: the history, the wars they had fought with each other, the specific quality of their institutional behavior when facing existential threat. The assessment team had noted in the executive summary that humans showed a consistent behavioral pattern under pressure that had no direct parallel in Compact records. They called it contingency depth, the apparent tendency to prepare, in significant detail, for scenarios they statistically should not have expected to encounter. Thessara requested the report. She read it. Felon recorded that she had requested it. He did not record what her aide told him she had said when she finished. He did not record it because he was not sure his chronicle framework had a category for it. The human ships arrived at the homeworld systems quietly. No weapons discharge, no communication demanding response, no ultimatum with a deadline. They simply appeared, one vessel per system, in stable orbital positions that their presence alone made strategic, close enough to demonstrate capability, far enough to avoid constituting an act of war under any definition the Compact's legal scholars cared to use. Parked, waiting. The message was structural: we can reach you, we already have. We are choosing not to do anything about it at this moment, and we would like you to spend some time considering the nature of that choice. Felon straightened his recording equipment. He was not certain why he did this. The delegation had not yet arrived. The sovereign dais chamber was empty except for his own preparation. He aligned his recording surfaces to the proper angle, checked the stylus pressure calibration, confirmed the archival timestamp sequence. His hands moved through the motions of 43 years, the small ritual of a person who had built his sense of order around the continuity of his work. He told himself it was professional habit. He did not look at the window. He already knew what was outside it. The human dreadnought was large. He had known this from the technical specifications in the intelligence report. Knowing the number and experiencing the shadow were different things. The shadow arrived before he was ready for it, sweeping across the observation panels in a slow geometric progression, cold where there had been starfield, a shape that did not match anything in his species' visual vocabulary for things that were allowed to be that close. No clearance had been requested. The bay doors had opened. Felon heard this from across the chamber, the distant mechanical sound of a station that had operated for 60,000 years admitting a visitor it had not formally authorized. He noted and did not record that no one had given the fire order. That the calculation, the precise, instantaneous, collective calculation of everyone in the Compact with any authority over weapons systems, had concluded without conference, without communication, that the number was wrong. 5 people walked into the chamber. 4 of them took positions that were not technically positions. They simply stopped moving at intervals that happened to cover the room's entry points. The 5th walked to the center. Sable Orenveth was smaller than Thessara had expected. This was not a thing Felon could record. He had no access to Thessara's expectations, but he could see it in the adjustment of her posture, the fractional realignment of a person recalibrating an assumption. Orenveth wore the same gray suit as the transmission. No insignia. No decoration. She moved without looking at anything she did not need to look at, and she did not look at the Compact seal. She activated her own display. The chamber's systems registered the unauthorized activation and did not override it. Felon watched this happen. He noted and did not record that the chamber's systems had never declined to override an unauthorized input before. He did not record it because he was no longer certain it was a fact of the session as opposed to a fact about the session, and he was still working out whether there was a difference. Admiral Corin Vale took a position 2 steps behind Orenveth's right shoulder. He was taller than she was, and older, and he had the quality of bearing that Felon had learned over 43 years, to recognize in people who had been in charge long enough that authority no longer required performance. He also had, Felon noticed, what appeared to be a prepared remark that he was waiting to deliver. He was carrying it the way military personnel carried suppressed reactions, visibly but correctly, as professional equipment. Orenveth let the room settle. Then she placed her hands flat on the display surface and said, "You are going to want to have already made peace with what I'm about to tell you." She showed them everything. Every mapped position in Compact space, every homeworld with a parked vessel overhead. Every tributary system where the informal communications had already begun shifting, where the word that translated from Terran as hope had already become hope in formal documents, where tribute payments had already been missed by one cycle, and where the administrating offices had not, for the first time in recorded compact history, initiated corrective procedure, because the administrating offices were waiting, the same way everyone was waiting, to see what this room decided. She showed them the 900-page report, reduced to its operative conclusions. She showed them what the Compact's own intelligence division had found and what the Council had not read. She showed them the battle record, the unedited version, with the commentary. The tributary system ends, she said. Here in this room in the next hour it ends. What replaces it is a collective defense agreement in which every species in this galaxy, including yours, including mine, holds one seat at one table and no species holds more than one. And decisions are made by consensus on matters that affect everyone, and by parties in interest on matters that affect fewer. The Corin Accords. My family name on it, because I did not think your institution should have to carry more than it already carries. Thesara had not moved. She was holding the compact seal. Her fingertips were at minimum brightness, dimmer than Phelan had ever seen them across 2,341 sessions, dimmer than the day the no arrived, dimmer than the moment the moon opened. You have every homeworld, she said. Yes. You could simply take the governance, hold the seats, run the systems. Orenveth's right hand moved, 3 fingers pressed flat against her left thigh, barely a sound. Phelan heard it across the chamber. He had been watching for it since the moment she walked in, and he still was not prepared for how quiet it was. Empires fall, Orenveth said. Always, we've done it to ourselves, 10,000 years of recorded history. We know the ending. We've read our own story often enough that we stopped wanting to write another version of it. Vale's prepared remark, it turned out, was, also, governing 60,000 years of entrenched bureaucracy sounds like the worst job in the known galaxy. No one laughed. Thesara looked down at the seal. At 94 names pressed into its surface in formal script, each one a species, each one an ending in a language the species had used to name itself before it stopped using that language. Orenveth picked it up. She held it for a moment, feeling the cold of it, the same cold it had always been, dark matter absorbing heat, 60,000 years of handling that had not changed the temperature once. Then she set it on the table and pushed it back. Keep it, she said. It's a list of everyone you failed. You should carry that. Thesara accepted it. She did not speak again for the rest of the session. Phelan recorded everything. His stylus moved at the precise, steady rhythm of his training, the click of institutional continuity, the sound of a civilization finding a new shape. He clicked it until he was done, then he set it down and did not pick it up. The Corin Accords took 11 months to negotiate. Every tributary species participated. Some arrived angry, with detailed accounting of resource transfers they intended to have acknowledged. Some sent delegations that wept in their species-appropriate fashion throughout the preliminary sessions and said nothing. Some came silent and left the same way, having signed without explanation. Elder Maeve Thesson, Thurvani, oldest member of the Compact Council, attended every session and said, in total, 41 words across 11 months, none of which Phelan considered safe to quote without the full context of what preceded them. The final signing ceremony was not what Phelan had expected. He had expected ceremony. He had expected the formal register of an institution acknowledging its own transformation. What he got was a table with 50 chairs, and signatures applied in the specific handwriting, light pattern, chemical deposit, or pressure mark of each species representative, and then a meal that someone from the Terran delegation had organized, and which included, by deliberate choice, a dish from every participating culture that could be reproduced under shared atmospheric conditions. Thesara ate. She ate carefully and without comment. She was sitting between a Kelhari representative and a younger Thurvani diplomat who had not been alive during the integration era and who kept asking questions she answered at appropriate length. Phelan published his chronicle 14 months after the signing. He titled it The Tap. The section that generated 4,000 academic responses, analyses, counter-analyses, entire research programs in xenopsychology and institutional theory, was a single paragraph describing the 3-finger tap against Orenveth's thigh, and what he believed it indicated about the moment she had decided the outcome was already determined. Scholars disagreed about what the paragraph meant. They agreed that it had changed Galactic shorthand. When, in any language, a being wanted to indicate the specific instant before everything changed, they tapped 3 fingers. 2 years after the signing, the first Collective Defense Council convened. 50 seats. 50 species, tributary and formerly governing and newly independent, arranged at a table that was not circular because no one had agreed on the symbolic implications of a circular table. So they had used a rectangle, which satisfied no one and offended no one and had the virtue of fitting in the available room. Humanity held 1 seat. The compact seal was submitted to the Galactic archive by Thessara Vond in a formal ceremony that lasted 12 minutes. She carried it in. She placed it in the display case. She read the placard text aloud in the formal register, once carried for 60,000 years, set down willingly. The distinction matters. She did not speak after that. She accepted the archivist's acknowledgement. She left. Phelan was given access to the archive chamber 2 days later in his capacity as the Chronicle's primary depositor. He had submitted 43 years of session records to the permanent collection. The archive accepted them and gave him a receipt. He stood for a while in the chamber. The seal sat under its case. The placard text was engraved in a material that held light differently than the surrounding stone, so that at certain angles the words appeared to glow without a source. He touched the case, not the seal, the glass above it, reading the placard with his fingertips the way Orethians read things they wanted to keep. The cold of the material transferred to his fingers, not the same cold as dark matter, but close. Everything eventually reached equilibrium, he thought, and then stopped thinking it because it sounded like a thing he would write in the margin section, and he had already written enough. He took out his stylus. He held it. He set it down on the table beside the case, where the light caught the groove he had made when the 11-second transmission arrived. The mark he had carried for years without repairing, without meaning to keep, that had simply become part of the instrument. He stood there for another moment, looking at the seal and the stylus and the placard's reflected light. Then he left. He did not record anything.